Done right, treating a prospect can take them from a business acquaintance to a genuine friend instantly, solidifying future sales opportunities and referrals from them for the foreseeable future. Done wrong, and they'll simply think you're making a desperate attempt to sell to them, pushing the relationship further away. That's the best and worst case scenario for both. The majority of the time, they'll think it's a nice thing that you've done and will increase the relationship strength marginally, which is still useful. But let's focus on how we can do this right. How can we pay large deposits into the emotional bank account and reap the rewards in the future? The first thing I'll say is that we need to consider what they'll like. This could be a physical treat, like chocolate or wine, or an experience treat, like taking them to a nice restaurant or to a show. But whatever it is, the treat must match with them. There's no point in taking a football fan to the ballet, unless you know they like both. And that goes both ways. If they're not a fan of football, don't take them to a football game. And don't buy wine for someone who doesn't drink. Like I mentioned in an earlier chapter, consider what you've discussed in the past or what they've directly referenced to you, like being sports fans or a music fan or a certain food or theatre fan. If they haven't mentioned anything directly, then check their social media. Look at the accounts that they follow, the pictures of them doing hobbies, comments they've made about their weekend plans, and so on. Then keep this information documented to use later on. When Christmas comes around, check your notes. You'll see it says, James likes a nice red wine, so buy him a bottle for Christmas. Or when you have access to a new theatre show, check your notes then, and spot Amanda wants to see the new showing of Hamlet. Offer to take her with you. Or when your marketing team makes some branded beers to send out for St. Patrick's Day, check your notes and see Stephen is teetotal, so don't send one to Stephen. Maybe find him some chocolate instead. These are easy wins that mean a lot to the people receiving them. So next, we'll dig a bit deeper into making the most of meeting them at those events and lunches that you're treating them to. So we've decided to either treat them with a nice meal or drinks out, or you're simply meeting them for an arranged business meeting at a mutual venue, like a restaurant, cafe, or bar. So how can we do this perfectly? Well, firstly, we need to consider the venue. Make sure it's something they'll like. Consider personal preference. Have they said anything that they like particular cuisines or locations? Maybe you assume that they'd want to go to a really fancy sushi restaurant, but in reality, they want nothing more than a burger and a milkshake. Consider dietary requirements too. If they're a vegan, don't take them to a steak restaurant. Or if they're lactose intolerant, then don't take them out for milkshakes. Then consider geography. Don't make them travel for more than half an hour unless it's a really good fit for them. And finally, consider cost. Be prepared for them to want to split the cost out of manners, so you don't want them to pay loads. You also have to pay for it yourself, whether you're expensing it or not. So keep it within your limits and your company limits. And going too expensive or too cheap may not be socially acceptable. So consider your client's tastes first. And second tip, arrive early. You don't want your client waiting around for you. That's bad etiquette. If you arrive early, you can choose the perfect location within the venue, considering space, views, noise, and so on. Thirdly, be careful with alcohol. If you do drink, then remember this is a professional relationship and a work meeting. You don't want to have too many drinks and say or do something you'll regret. So let them drink as much as they please. But be aware of yourself and remain in control. And finally, put your phone away. This has become more and more of a problem since smartphones have become commonplace, but it still needs to be addressed. When you're in a meeting with someone, you're in a meeting with them, not your colleagues, not your other prospects, not even your boss. You're meeting them, so pay them the attention. Put your phone on silent, do not disturb, or even turn it off entirely. This is simply polite and will show your customer that they have your undivided attention. Of course, if an emergency call comes in, then it must be taken, but don't reply to emails, check your social media, or take unnecessary calls if you don't need to. Something important to all of this is to keep momentum. How do you grow a snowball as big as you can? You don't roll it like a bowling ball as hard as you possibly can. You give it small, regular pushes to keep it moving and gathering snow, getting bigger and bigger. So, if you're trying to grow a relationship with your customer like a snowball, then you do just that. You don't just meet them once and then never again. You make the meetings a regular, recurring event. You book in a regular event from the start if you can, and that way it becomes a habit. And habits are hard to drop. There's also less pressure on each meeting because it's simply one of your regular get-togethers, rather than a high-pressure individual meeting. So, how often should you be having these meetings? Well, that's a decision you need to make, and one I can't tell you the answer to. However, err on the side of caution here and remember that less is more. If you're meeting every week without something very important to discuss, like an ongoing project or an upcoming deadline, then you'll start to take too much of your prospect's time. But equally, if you're meeting once a year, your relationship might start to diminish. So, I found that once a quarter is a good balance. It's frequent enough to keep you at the front of their mind, but it's also infrequent enough that there are new things to discuss. Now, the only last thing I'll say on this is to not always use these meetings to sell. That applies to all meetings and conversations. Don't just meet and sell, sell, sell. Remember what we said about having conversations. They're not sales pitches. If every time you speak to your prospect, you're trying to sell to them, then you'll start to get annoyed and the relationship will diminish. Use some meetings just to build a friendship or just to ask how they're doing, and that's it. Hold back your new products and services for when they ask, or it's a good fit for a problem they're experiencing now. The final section to this chapter is a warning. When doing all of this, you need to avoid crossing the line between treating your client to develop a personal relationship and bribery. Now, this totally depends on your local laws. I'm not legally qualified to give you a definitive parameter, and I suggest you either seek legal advice or speak to your company's HR or legal department. You might even have a company handbook that will explain where the limits are. So I can only speak from experience in the UK, but make sure you're fully informed about your local bribery laws and limits. The way I've kept the mental divide is to consider whether an if this then that agreement has been made. That brings you too close to the line of bribery, and you need to be aware of that. For example, if I take you to lunch, will you buy the product from me? If I buy you a box of wine for Christmas, will you make me your primary supplier? Even if I pay for lunch, will you meet me? All of these are conditions. If someone was to say yes to any of those, then they're agreeing. If you buy me some wine for Christmas, I will make you our primary supplier. That can be understood as bribery, and you could get in a lot of trouble. Of course, there's nothing stopping you doing any of those things simply out of kindness or to solidify a business relationship with zero expectation of the favor being returned in the form of a sale, being made a supplier, or simply meeting for lunch. You can buy them wine. You can take them for lunch. You can give them any gift you like. You just need to be conscious of crossing the fine line into unethical and often illegal practices. So beware of that and keep it clean.